I'm sorry that I can't attend the Kyiv Security Forum in person, but I appreciate the opportunity by the organizers to let me speak to you by video. As we wait for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to get underway, we need to think about how the war might end. Peace talks and a ceasefire under present circumstances will be very bad for Ukraine, leaving Russia in control of Donbass, Crimea, and the country's southern coast. The deeper problem is that as long as Vladimir Putin remains in power, any settlement will simply provide Russia with breathing space to rearm and re-equip its forces in anticipation of a later resumption of the war. This means that any durable settlement will need to include much stronger security guarantees for Ukraine. Mere verbal commitments from Western powers will not be sufficient. They made such commitments in the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, whereby Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for promises to respect the country's territorial integrity. These commitments were honored neither by the Russians nor by Ukraine's Western backers. Today, nothing short of membership in NATO, with its Article 5 guarantee, would be sufficient to deter a future Russian resumption of the current war. NATO membership may become a real possibility if the Ukrainian counteroffensive successfully reclaims the two southern oblasts of Kherson and Zaporizhia bordering the Black Sea coast. This region is critical to Ukraine's bargaining position for three reasons. First, to help restore Ukraine's ability to export from its Black Sea ports. Second, to rescue the remaining pro-Ukrainian people trapped in this region. And third, to cut off Russia's ability to resupply Crimea. Reclaiming ththese territories will block the land bridge to Crimea from Russia and put the Kerch Strait Bridge under severe threat. In addition, the Ukrainians can cut the canal once again that supplies fresh water to the peninsula. It's possible that the Ukrainian offensive will succeed in a spectacular fashion and that Russia's weakened forces will collapse across the whole front. But a more modest and possibly plausible scenario is for Ukraine to retake Kherson and Zaporizhia by late summer. This will lay the grounds not for a formal peace agreement, but for a self-enforcing armistice. A formal peace agreement under which Russia accepted NATO membership for Ukraine and Ukraine ceded legal sovereignty over Donbass or Crimea is very hard to imagine, and it's not desirable as a matter of principle. But an enduring, less formal armistice is conceivable. The threat of the slow strangulation of Crimea might finally give Putin an incentive to stop his attacks on Ukraine, unblock Ukraine's ports on a continuing basis, and commit to ending terroristic missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. There have been other similar arrangements in the past. North and South Korea never signed a peace treaty in 1954 and are still technically in a state of war, and yet the Korean peninsula has been stable ever since then. However, the viability of such an agreement will fundamentally depend on Ukrainian membership in NATO. Opposition to the country's membership in past years was understandable based on the fact that Ukraine was engaged in a hot war with Russia since 2014, and membership would immediately embroil the alliance in that war. If there's an armistice, however, and a quiet understanding that Ukraine for the moment would no longer actively seek to reclaim further territory, the task for NATO falls in line with its mission as a fundamentally defensive alliance. Indeed, it will not be possible to arrive at an armistice and stability between Ukraine and Russia without NATO membership. Any NATO member having doubts about this needs to articulate what alternative peace deal is possible in the coming years that will not be simply a short-lived ceasefire allowing Russia to rearm, rebuild, and restart the war at a later date. We need to start thinking concretely about the conditions under which NATO will accept Ukraine and prepare ourselves actively for such an outcome. This thinking needs to begin now because we in the West are still very far from consensus on this issue. Thank you very much for your attention.